All right, all right. Welcome back to another episode of the Behind the Back podcast, post game 49ers edition. 49ers lose 12-6 to the Los Angeles Rams, and that essentially ices the 49ers' hopes for making the playoffs. And it's actually going to be a good thing. Hear me out. Hear me out. It's been a rough season. It was a frustrating season, injuries and beaten and battered team emotionally, mentally, outside of football. A lot of life happened for these guys that was really unfortunate. Just vibes were never up at any point this season. But what this does mean is going into next year, you've missed the playoffs. You're going to have a losing record if you kind of play these next few weeks right. And you're going to have an easier schedule opening up next year versus the one you had this year where you had insane amounts of, rest disadvantages against the teams you were playing from week to week. You had all these injuries, obviously, going into the season, and just, there's things to look forward to and build off of. One thing I want to highlight that's going to be my game ball, I'll kind of get ahead of myself here. The first game ball goes to the defense. And the defense is what I want to highlight in this game because this was a defensive battle for both teams. The Rams did an excellent job forcing the 49ers to, force things down the field, which ultimately was the reason Brock Purdy was very inaccurate today and a very mid quarterback. He looked below average in a lot of ways because of what the Rams were doing to him defensively. Obviously in the first half, the elements were very much elementing. And the rain was coming down hard. We all know Brock Purdy tends to kind of struggle in rain games, right? And you saw that in the first half. But it was also coming down to the extent where it also affected Matt Stafford, who has played in rain before. So, this was a tough game in the first half for both these quarterbacks. And ultimately, both these quarterbacks were not the reason that their teams won. There were no touchdowns in this game. This game was won off of field goals. It was 12-6. So you saw 6 field goals throughout the entire game. That kind of game is rare to see, especially in today's NFL where everything is all about running up the score as best you can, and all the advantages go to the offense. But the defensive outing for the 49ers in this game was phenomenal. And this is something you build off of. Obviously, today you got Dre Greenlaw back. You had Nick Bosa back. You had Talanoa Hufanga out there holding down the secondary and the safety. And it was the most complete defensive game I've seen from this Niners unit. Obviously, still the play calling is a little questionable by Nick Sorensen. And the biggest one to me was to essentially force the Rams to kick the ball outside of the 2-minute mark. It completely left the tight end uncovered, and it was an easy first down that brought it to the 2-minute, and they were able to, just take more time off the clock before ultimately we forced them to a field goal. So you could have had more time on the clock to work with offensively if you could have taken care of that defensively. And I don't put that on the guys out on the field. I put that on the play calling for not having your guys ready in time for that one. So that was, this season we've seen a lot of poor coaching on the defensive side of the football. And again, it's hard. You've seen it on the offensive end too. And the biggest thing is those injuries. You're playing with guys with a lot of inexperience and guys who don't see the field as much as they were this season. And that kind of thing has a major impact on the kind of style and the scheme that you draw up going into a game. And it definitely showed in this one as well, right? But defensively, this Niners team, aside from that play, was great in this game. And it's something that you build off of. It's something that you have confidence in going into next year because you're going to retain a lot of these guys defensively. Offensively is where we're going to start having some conversations. So obviously, Marcos and I talked about the Deebo Samuel situation and how last week he tweeted that he's just not getting the ball. Well, in this one, to start the game, the 49ers were force-feeding Deebo early. The very first play of the game, they went right to Deebo. And he didn't make the play, didn't make the catch. And they just continued to kind of go his way, whether it be in the backfield or through the air. And he just at no point today did anything with it. Rushing, he saw 2 carries for 3 yards. Receiving, he saw 3 catches for 16 yards, but he was targeted 7 times. So that's a bit of a red flag for a player who is essentially calling out the scheme, because he says he's not calling out the players. He says he's not calling out the coaching staff. I guess you're calling out the scheme at that point. Is somebody who's calling out the scheme like that, and then when the ball goes right to you on a chance to convert a 3rd and 10, make it a first down, and probably have a touchdown, you drop it. And it was a perfect ball. That was a perfect ball by Purdy. And drops were an unfortunate thing in this game. That's something that, obviously in the first half, rain's coming down hard. I get it. The ball is slippery. But some of those plays you really got to make. Juwan had one. Deebo had a couple. There's guys out there who just kind of missed some plays offensively today. And because of that, if you score that touchdown, you might win this game. I mean, if everything played out the way it did, you win this game by 1 point. So it's those opportunities, those missed opportunities that I've talked about throughout the season as well, on top of the injuries, is not taking advantage of late game scenarios and not taking advantage of things that are coming your way. Early on in this game, I thought for sure we were going to have an interception. The ball ended up touching Diamador Lenore's hand at one point and should have been a pick in one of the first Rams drives of the game. And then right after that, the Rams are back out on the field, and Talanoa Hufanga has the ball go right into his chest, and it bounces off. Now, the Hufanga one makes a little bit of sense because he has that club on his hand that he's playing with. So you got to make that play with one hand, right? And maybe a forearm in there. But nonetheless, it's a missed opportunity, and it's something that has just been the story all season long, and it was the story again in this game. And it will be the story of the 2024 run for the Niners. And, it's frustrating. It sucks. You wanted to see a better season coming off of that Super Bowl loss, but now it's time to retool. And that's the key. Marcos and I talked about, is it a rebuild or is it a retool? It's a retool. And this was evident of that. If we look at the last 2 weeks, offensively, obviously you played the Bears last week, but your offensive showing was awesome. And you didn't have your, number 1 and 2 options in a lot of ways. You didn't have Brandon Ayuk out there. You didn't have CMC. You didn't have Jordan Mason, right? And in this one, you had, a Isaac Guerrero who's playing on a foot sprain, and you could tell he was slow. He was slower than he's been. He still was making plays as best he could, and he had a couple really good first down pickups, but ultimately it wasn't the Isaac Guerrero we've seen throughout this year in the little spurts that he's had. So, it's frustrating from that standpoint, but ultimately just the effort that we saw defensively and the heart that we saw defensively today is something you can just take a lot of, I guess, eagerness going into next year, because you're eager to get back out on the field and show that this defense is more than capable, when healthy, of holding down great teams. I mean, this Rams team put up 44 points against the Bills last week, and that Bills team is no push down in any way, shape, or form. Josh Allen's on the other side of that, and we just got blown out by Josh Allen a couple weeks prior to that. So, when I look at that, you held the Rams to without a touchdown and to 4 field goals. So defensively, just a monster effort. Offensively, complete letdown. And the fact that the defense was able to get even that last stop and hold them to a field goal instead of just being able to run out the clock was huge. Because at that point, your defense has been on the field for the entire game, essentially. I mean, if I'm going to pull up the time of possession here, the Rams dominated in a lot of ways. They almost had a full quarter more of possession than us. I mean, they had 35 minutes to our 24. So our defense was out there a vast majority of this game, and our defense still made really good plays. And, this is the offensively, this is the second worst yard total in a game under Kyle Shanahan, in the Kyle Shanahan era. And it's frustrating because you saw a lot of holes in this Rams defense going in to the season, and especially into this game, and you couldn't utilize it. And a lot of that is because, you're leaning on a running back who's a little bit handicapped in the way that he can run today with that foot sprain. You don't have your RB1 or 2. So the run game that you're used to running, it didn't show as much. And there was no way you could show it as much. So injuries, it was tough. But there's a lot to build off of. You got a whole season next year. And we're hoping for just a quick turnaround on the off season. We'll get into the off season. We'll build what the lines, like the defensive, the offensive lines, and work on some of the depth and like linebackers and safeties. And as far as wide receivers are concerned, we'll see how that shakes down. But if I'm being honest with you as a Niners fan, in my perspective on things, I think it's time to move on from Deebo Samuel. That energy that he brought last week, it was very Deebo Samuel-esque. This is something that he does. He takes to Twitter, but he also backs up all his talk. And for one of the first times in his career, we saw him not back up his talk this week. And we saw him do it in a just awful way. I mean, he was so subpar, it's not even funny. It's not even something to joke about. So I think it's officially time you move on from Deebo Samuel. You won't be able to get much for him because his contract is a little bit difficult, and teams may not want a guy who's essentially washed at this point. It's tough. How do you add that onto your team unless you're looking at just a veteran leader? But even that is questionable at times. So it's going to be interesting. We're going to talk about it. But on other notes, I know this is a Niners post game, but the Sacramento Kings got the dub tonight against the New Orleans Pelicans, and I have to give them a quick shout out. I know there's probably not some Kings fans listening to this, but Kings lost 6 straight to the New Orleans Pelicans last year, and at no point felt like they were going to beat them. And this season, they started, they played their first game against them now, and the first game was a win. You got the win against the New Orleans Pelicans, who in a lot of ways is your kryptonite. So it was a good win. It was ugly, but it was good. There's really good things to take out of that. And DeMar DeRozan took over the third quarter and really opened up the scoring for the Beam team tonight. So this has been a rough season. I'll get into my final game ball here. So obviously I gave it to the defense as a whole because I really liked what they did and came out with the aggression today. I can't give it to anybody else on the offense because there was just nobody else on offense that could do anything today. So the player I'm giving it to is going to be Dre Greenlaw because he battled back from a terrible injury in the biggest game of his career. And tonight just came out with, he broke down the pregame huddle. He broke that down for the guys, got everybody amped up. Him and Fred Warner had an awesome moment right before the game where they kind of, locked helmets together and had a little conversation, probably amped each other up, talked about how much each other, whatever the case. And it was just really awesome to see his energy back out on the field and in a lot of ways his heart and soul for this defense. I call Fred Warner the heart and soul, but I feel like Fred Warner flies around a little bit different when Dre Greenlaw is out there. And that was something that I took out of this game especially. So I appreciate you guys listening in. Niners fans, it's been a rough year. I know I've been going through it as well with you guys, and it's been rough. But it's time to start building for next year. Next year is going to be a bounce back year. And you're not coming off of a Super Bowl loss, and you're probably not even going to be – you're not going to be coming off of any playoff run whatsoever. So you're going to have rest. You're going to have guys who are able to get the much needed full offseason rest. And this is something this team hasn't seen in since 2020, right? So appreciate you guys listening to me. I've been Ben Retz. This has been the Behind the Back podcast, post-game 49ers edition, probably the last one of the season. The episodes week-to-week basis will continue as Marcos and I break down everything Eagles related, everything Sacramento Kings, and we'll continue to talk some Niners things as everything comes up and everything unfolds and shakes down. I'll talk about the week-to-week before the season is over still. I'll kind of give you guys a little preview and sneak peek into what I'm looking for going into the weeks, but ultimately the post games I'm probably going to put a hold on here for the rest of the season. So thank you guys for listening. I appreciate you. Bang, bang, Niner gang. You can hit us up on any of our socials down below. Email us at behindthebackpod13@gmail.com. We love talking to you guys. It's so much fun to talk about our favorite teams from a week to week basis and just break things down and hear what you guys have to say as well. So appreciate you guys. Love y'all. Peace.